Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere warm, slightly sour and bubbling with mystery. No, not your cousin's kombucha setup. Think older, way older. Imagine a world where your breakfast drink is a pint of beer, made not by a bartender, but by a monk who's taken a vow of silence, and still manages to brew better than your local craft brewery. Welcome to the medieval monastery. You're not just visiting. You're in it now. You've got a robe that's slightly itchy, sandals that never quite fit right, and a full day of chanting ahead, after you finish your morning brew. Which, by the way, isn't for fun. It's calories, it's safety, it's God-approved hydration. And honestly, you're definitely not surviving this century. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir awake in your straw-stuffed mattress, and the scent hits first. Bread, warmth, and something just slightly fermented. No one's shouting, no alarms. Just the rhythmic bell calling you to matins, the first prayers of the day. But before you even set foot in the chapel, you detour. The brewing room hums, not loud, more like a heartbeat you didn't realize belonged to the building. Stone walls, wooden beams dark with age, copper kettles gleaming in the flickering torchlight. This is where it all begins. Monks here brew not because it's trendy, but because it's necessary. Clean water? Gamble. Beer? Safer even for kids. And this isn't the boozy stuff that gets your uncle kicked out of weddings. This is small beer, mild, cloudy, barely alcoholic, but packed with grains, vitamins, and comfort. You take your cup and sip. It's warm, a little sour, like bread soup with confidence issues. But it fills you, grounds you, reminds you you're part of something older than the sunrise outside. The head brewer, Brother Aldrich, nods at you as he stirs. He hasn't spoken since last Easter, but he communicates with the subtle intensity of a man who knows exactly how hot barley should be. He motions toward the barrel room. You follow. Inside, rows of casks, stacked and sealed with wax. Some marked for feast days. Others simply labeled with cryptic phrases like "when snow falls twice" or "for storms, internal and otherwise." You touch one, it's cool, heavy, a little sticky. You ask yourself, not out loud because monks are serious about their quiet, how these men figured this all out. The precise temperatures, the fermentation times, the herbal additives, the accidental genius of leaving wheat water in the sun and saying, "Yep, that's breakfast now, it's a miracle." And it's science and it's something in between. Back outside, the bells call again, but you linger a moment longer, watching Brother Aldrich gently blow across the surface of the cooling wort, like he's blessing it, or listening to it. Monks believed brewing was prayer made tangible. Every step, a meditation, every barrel, a silent sermon. And honestly, there's peace in that. Maybe that's why even now people chase that feeling. Not just the taste, the ritual. So, next time you open a beer and the foam rises just a little too fast, maybe whisper a thank you, not to the bartender, but to a silent monk in itchy robes who once believed that barley, water, and thyme could sanctify the soul. You're sitting in the scriptorium, but not for reading. Tonight it's a laboratory. Parchment rustles softly beneath your fingertips. Ink pots, once reserved for copying scripture, now stand beside mortar and pestle. And the smell. It's a blend of dried thyme, singed sage, and something suspiciously like burnt toast. Welcome to the experimental phase of monastic brewing. This is where the recipes were born. Not from tradition, but from glorious, well-intentioned chaos. Brother Herwin sits across from you, nose buried in a scroll titled Medicinal Digestives and Humoral Balance. But he's not really reading. He's searching for inspiration, for ratios, for the next great mistake. See, medieval. Monks didn't have brewing manuals, they had guts. And faith. And a lot of barley. You glance at the shelf nearby. Scrolls and bound ledgers crammed with brews scribbled in the margins of sermons. Try fennel with cold water soak. Didn't die. Tastes like holy regret. Do not repeat. Excellent. For pilgrims with stomach trouble. Possibly also demons. You smile, this was trial and error before labs, alchemy before chemistry. And occasionally, straight-up divine hallucination. Take Brother Wymond, for example. He once claimed a vision of St. Bridget told him to brew using lavender, honey, and a splash of vinegar. The result? A tart floral concoction that caused half the monastery to fall asleep and the other half to see the Virgin Mary in their soup. Itiu was deemed spiritually volatile. But here's the thing, monks weren't just brewing for calories, they were chasing something bigger. Beer wasn't just food, it was medicine, a tool for healing the humours, a buffer against plague, a balm for grief. Some brews were for the sick, others for fasting seasons, rich in grains to make up for lost meals. A few, deep, dark, slow fermented, were for mourning. You touch a scroll labelled Cleansing Brew, for End of Confession, it's E. Ingredients include juniper, smoked salt, and ash from the penitent's candle. Probably not FDA approved, but to the monks, each ingredient carried meaning, memory, purpose. They didn't separate science from spirit. A brew could be holy and helpful, sacred and sour. You glance across the room. Brother Herwin is now staring into a jar of wild yeast like it owes him an apology. He'll try again tomorrow, because this process, the scribbling, the failing, the tasting, the retrying, is worship in motion. Historians will call it primitive. But in this quiet room, among scrolls and bubbling glass, you see it for what it really was. Devotion, measured in drops, refined by hope, and sometimes guided by the faint whisper of a saint with questionable taste. The herb garden isn't just a patch of green. It's a living prayer. You step lightly between rows of sage, thyme, and mint, the air thick with scents both sharp and sweet. Bees hum lazily, and somewhere nearby, a fountain gurgles like a soft chant. Brother Aemon, the garden keeper, moves slowly beside you, hands folded beneath his robe. These plants, he says, are more than ingredients. They are symbols. You pause by a cluster of lavender. Lavender, he explains, for calm and clarity, added to brews meant to soothe restless minds. You touch a sprig of rosemary next. Memory. Remembrance. For those who've lost much and need to feel. Connected again, he points to a stand of bitter wormwood. Bitterness for penitence, for balance. Historians often overlook this layer of meaning. The way monks didn't just chase flavor, but sought to infuse the spirit of the plants into their brews. Every herb was chosen with care, its properties understood not just by science, but by centuries of prayer and observation. You kneel beside a patch of chamomile, used for healing, Aemon says softly, also for forgiveness, a reminder that bitterness can be softened if you let it. You inhale deeply. The garden fills your lungs and your thoughts. The monks worked these herbs into every batch, not just to improve taste, but to guide the drinker's soul. Some brews were meant to uplift, others to ground, some to awaken. You touch a small, delicate flower, the violet. Humility, Aemon whispers. For the ones who carry burdens quietly, the garden is alive with meaning. Not. Everything that grows here is edible. Some plants were considered sacred, forbidden to touch unless in ceremony. Others were gathered only under specific moons or after certain prayers. The monks believed that the when and how mattered as much as the what. You glance around again, feeling the layers of care. It's not just brewing, it's communion, between earth, herb, water, and spirit, between the gardener's hands and the brewer's heart, and maybe, just maybe, between you and the quiet prayer of a plant steeped in time. You step into the brewhouse and the world shifts. Copper kettles gleam like polished suns, their rounded bellies catching the flicker of torchlight. Steam rises in lazy spirals, carrying the warm, sharp scent of malt and something faintly sweet, like toasted honey. It's noisy but not chaotic. Rhythmic, measured, a living heartbeat beneath the stone roof. Brother Joran is already at work, his hands moving with practiced ease. The scrape of the mash paddle, the hiss of boiling water meeting grain, it's all part of a dance older than the abbey itself. You ask what makes the beer here different. He smiles without stopping. Patience, prayer, precision. Unlike modern brews, these batches are brewed for nourishment and spirit, not for intoxication. The alcohol is low, the flavor earthy, the texture thick enough to be nearly food. You watch as malted barley is poured into a large copper kettle, roasted by fire but never burned, Joran explains. Too much heat kills the soul. The mash begins, a thick porridge that bubbles and shifts, releasing starches and sugars. You lean closer, feeling the warmth. Brother Joran tells you that every step is observed. Temperature, timing, even the phase of the moon, for some batches, because the monks believe the cosmos whispers into the brew. Historians still debate this. Some say it's superstition, others hint at early science before science was a thing. But you see the monks, moving quietly yet confidently, they check the yeast, a living, breathing culture passed down through generations, wild and unpredictable, but cared for like a fragile child. They pitch it carefully into the cooled mash. And then they wait. You settle beside a wooden barrel where the beer will ferment slowly, quietly. The air thickens, the beer bubbles softly. You realize brewing here isn't just about food or drink. It's about connection, to earth, to spirit, to each other. And in this ancient brewhouse with its gleaming copper and rising steam, you find a kind of sacred rhythm. Secrets hide in plain sight, not beneath locked chests or cryptic codes, but in the quiet folding of leaves, the careful measuring of roots, and the whispered names passed from one monk to another. You stand in the herb room, a small dim space lined with jars and bundles hanging from rafters. Each container holds something unusual: dried elderflower, crushed coriander, angelica root, and, oddly, tiny scrolls of parchment tied with red thread. Brother Selen moves among the shelves like a conductor, pulling ingredients with care. Abduli, balance is delicate, he says. Too much of one herb and the brew turns harsh. Too little, and it lacks spirit. He shows you a list, not written but memorized, that pairs each herb with its purpose. Juniper berries, for clarity and cleansing. Chamomile, to soothe the stomach and calm the mind. Sweet gale, for warmth and protection. Yarrow, to aid in healing and ward off bitterness. But it's not just about taste. Each herb carries a spiritual weight, a prayer woven into its bitterness or sweetness. Monks believed brewing was an act of healing, body and soul alike. Some brews were given to the sick, others to those in deep mourning, a few for moments of celebration where joy needed grounding. You notice small symbols next to each herb on a faded parchment: a cross, a crescent moon, a star. Those mark the time to harvest, Selen explains. Not just for potency, but for spiritual resonance. The monks harvested with ritual. Hands washed, prayers said, tools blessed. Even the way herbs were dried mattered. Not all could be stored together. Some herbs conflicted, like temperamental. Monks in a quiet room. You smell a bundle of dried mint. Good for clarity, Selen says, and for reminding the drinker to breathe. You realize this room isn't just a pantry. It's a chapel, each herb a hymn, and each brew a sacrament crafted from earth, air, water, fire, and a touch of faith. Yeast isn't just an ingredient here. It's a legacy. You find yourself in a cool, shadowed cellar where barrels rest in quiet rows and the air smells faintly of bread and rain. Here lives the monastery's most treasured secret, the mother. Yeast, a living culture passed from generation to generation, as carefully guarded as any sacred text. Brother Gildas cradles a small wooden box lined with damp cloth. Inside, a shallow bowl holds a bubbling, frothy liquid, the heart of every brew. This, he whispers, is our gift and our responsibility. You watch as he gently transfers a portion to a new batch of wort, his hands steady but reverent. The yeast is alive, temperamental, sensitive to touch, temperature, and even the mood of the room. Too cold, and it sleeps. Too warm, and it dies. Too rough, and it rebels, Gildas says. Historians might call it biology, but here it's something more, a living connection to monks long gone, to brews long past. You notice faint marks around the box, tiny symbols etched into the wood, a barley stalk, a cross, a crescent moon. These are blessings, protection spells of sorts. The monks never take yeast for granted. Some strains are retired, with ceremony, others celebrated with silent prayer. You ask what happens if the yeast dies. Gilda smiles sadly. We begin again. But it's never the same. Like losing a friend. The culture lives in the air too. The stone walls breathe it in and out. The monks say you can taste the history in the foam. You lean closer. The bubbles pop softly. Tiny explosions of past meals, prayers, mistakes, and miracles. It's fragile, but it's eternal. You descend a narrow staircase carved into the abbey's stone foundations. The air grows cooler, heavier, with a faint tang of earth and something almost sweet. This is the fermentation chamber, the heart of transformation. Rows of barrels, stacked and sealed, fill the dim space. Each one hums softly, not with sound exactly, but with presence. The room breathes. Brother Callum waits beside a massive oak cask, its surface etched with symbols worn smooth by time and hands. This place, he whispers, is where the beer finds its soul. You run your hand over the wood. It feels warm, knotty. From heat, but from time. Here, the monks believe, fermentation is not just a chemical process. It's a kind of alchemy. Yeast, grain, water, all elements come together and change, slowly, quietly. The beer takes shape not just in barrels, but in the patience of the space. You notice the faint light filtering through tiny cracks, sunlight that barely reaches in, just enough to remind you of the world outside. This chamber is sealed against noise and distraction. The monks rarely speak here, because even a whisper can disturb the delicate balance. Some barrels are marked for months, even years, waiting for the perfect moment. You watch Callum gently tap the side of a barrel. The sound vibrates softly. He says the beer listens. Historians debate how medieval monks mastered fermentation, but they don't capture the quiet respect, the reverence, the belief that inside these barrels, time is a companion, not an enemy. You lean against the cool stone. The chamber hums. You realize that patience is more than waiting. Here it is creating. Symbols are everywhere, not just on walls or in books, but stamped into barrels, etched onto lids, scribbled in margin notes. You find yourself tracing these curious marks, the spirals, crosses, stars, and strange glyphs, each a tiny puzzle piece. In the monastery's brewing story, Brother Soren, the keeper of records, watches you with a knowing smile. These markings, he says, are our language, our shorthand, our prayer. Each symbol means something precise: a spiral for a slow fermentation, a star for a batch blessed during a festival, a cross for brews made in honor of the sick. You pick up a barrel lid marked with a crescent moon. That means the yeast was pitched during the waning moon, Soren explains. They say it affects the strength and clarity. Historians debate the influence of lunar cycles on brewing. Monks? They accepted it as part of the mystery. You see marks indicating the type of herbs added, the water source, even the mood of the brewer that day. Some marks are artistic flourishes, a tiny painted hop, a doodle of a smiling monk, proof that, even in strict silence, joy found a way. Soren pulls out a worn scroll. It's a ledger, but unlike any you've seen. Columns not just for dates and volumes, but for blessings invoked, prayers said, and sometimes apologies offered. Because brewing was never just a recipe. It was an act of faith, a dance of art and science, and sometimes a silent conversation with the divine. You smile. In these symbols, the monks left more than records. They left a language of care. You trace your fingers across the wooden lid of a barrel, still warm from the slow fermentation inside. The markings carved into its surface catch your eye. Not words, not numbers, but symbols. A circle broken by a jagged line. 3 dots inside. High triangle, a spiral that fades into nothing. You glance at a monk nearby, his robes dusted with fine grains of malt. What do these mean? You ask. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he steps closer to the barrel, places his palm flat on the symbol, and closes his eyes like someone greeting an old friend. When he speaks, it's barely louder than the hum of fermenting air. They're prayers, he says. Not ones you speak, but ones you drink. You tilt your head, unsure whether to laugh or nod in reverence. These aren't just batches, he explains. Each barrel holds more than beer. It holds the mood of the day, the silence of the morning, the hesitation of the hands that stirred the mash. We mark them with symbols because letters lie too easily. You peer closer. The symbol on this particular barrel seems sharper, recently etched, a crescent moon above an open eye. This one? You ask. He gives a faint smile. Brewed during an eclipse. The monk stirring it that night claimed he saw visions in the steam. You can't tell if he's joking, but the way his fingers rest gently on the wood suggests he believes it, whether or not you do. Historians still debate whether medieval monks assigned mystical meanings to their brewing, or if these symbols were simply a practical way to track recipes and fermentation quirks. But standing here, surrounded by barrels that hum softly like beehives of memory, you sense the answer isn't meant to be written down. Another monk appears, much younger, carrying a worn parchment. He holds it open for you. No words, just symbols drawn in fading ink, some simple, some dizzyingly complex. We pass this down, he says, to remember flavors no tongue can describe. You follow him deeper into the storeroom. The air grows heavier, like stepping through time instead of space. He stops before a barrel larger than the rest. Its symbol is unlike the others, a single teardrop pierced by a bolt of lightning. Only brewed once, he says quietly, during a plague winter. You place your hand on the barrel. The wood is cold. It doesn't hum like the others. It holds its breath. You think about everything that might be sealed inside. Desperation, hope, the need to create something warm in the middle of fear. You suddenly realize that this wasn't just nourishment, it was resistance, liquid defiance in the face of silence and death. The monk breaks your thoughts. We don't drink from this one. We remember it. You nod. There's nothing to say. So, instead you walk slowly through the rows of barrels, reading the language carved into their skin. Not words, not numbers, just memory, distilled. The corridor narrows, the barrels thin out, the silence deepens. You've followed the younger monk as far as he'll go. He stops, bows slightly, and gestures ahead. Beyond a narrow archway of stone lies a single room, lit only by a small slit of light from a window so high it feels unreachable. Inside you see one man, a monk. He sits cross-legged in front of a barrel unlike any you've seen before. It's smaller, almost elegant in shape, not worn, not aged, but clearly older than anything else here. The wood is dark and smooth, the surface polished as if by centuries of touch. No dust rests on it, no tools lie nearby. The monk doesn't move when you enter. He simply opens his eyes. They are pale grey, nearly translucent in the dim light, and when they meet yours, you forget for a moment where you are. You forget what century this is. You nod respectfully. He does not return it. You approach the barrel slowly. There are no symbols on its surface, just one line of text, burned deep into the wood. Latin tacita cervicia, the silent beer. You look back at the monk. Is it forbidden? You whisper. He tilts his head slightly, as if amused, but he says nothing. You try again. Why is this one alone? Still no answer, only silence. Thick, heavy, and comforting. A parchment rests beside him, covered in meticulously drawn tally marks. Hundreds, maybe thousands. You realize they're not days, they're visits. People who've come to sit with this barrel, to be near it, to listen. Because this barrel is not meant to be consumed, it is meant to be kept. Monks pass by the door sometimes, leave a hand on. The frame nod, then walk on. None enter. Only this monk stays, day after day. Year after year, perhaps. He has taken a vow, not just of silence, but of guardianship. You sit beside him. He doesn't look at you again. But somehow his presence tells you it's all right. You close your eyes, there is no chanting here. No bubbling fermentation, no footsteps, no whispered stories, only the soft breathing of someone who's made peace with stillness. Historians still debate what tacita cervicia truly was. Some believe it's symbolic, a placeholder for lost knowledge. Others suggest the beer was brewed only once, during a time of great sorrow, and never again. A spiritual monument sealed in wood, but none of them have sat here next to this silent monk in this quiet room. You have, and somehow that makes all the difference. You don't speak. You don't need to. The silence is fuller than any song. The beer is real. You just don't have to drink it to feel it. The silence lingers long after you leave the quiet monk behind. Even as you return to the broader halls of the monastery, where voices hum and sandals shuffle across stone, there's a softness in your ears, like they're still attuned to something deeper. But that serenity doesn't last long. You step into the outer courtyard and suddenly, it's not quiet anymore. There are voices, not monks, strangers, pilgrims, travelers, even a few curious nobles wrapped in furs too fine for this humble place. Their faces are weather-worn and curious. Their eyes scan the stone walls not for crosses or scripture, but for barrels. You realize with a pang of surprise, they didn't come here to pray. They came for the beer. A monk in his 50s leans beside you, arms folded beneath his robes, watching the growing crowd with a hint of both pride and irritation. It used to be, he says, they came to confess their sins. Now they come to refill their flasks. You can't help but chuckle. The smell of hops hangs thick in the air, stronger than incense. He sighs. We used to serve beer because we had to. Now we serve it because they expect us to. You watch as a long line forms near a modest wooden counter tucked beneath the cloister's archways. A single barrel sits there, watched over by a silent novice who ladles out portions into waiting mugs, cups, and even polished goblets brought from afar. This was no longer just sustenance. It had become a phenomenon. The monks had unintentionally brewed fame. You hear whispers from the visitors. It's stronger in the north wing. Ask for the moon batch. They only serve it during Lent. They stir it with blessed spoons. Legends bloom wherever there's flavor and mystery. The monastery had become a pilgrimage site not just for the devout, but for the thirsty. Historians still debate the moment it shifted. When did sacred brewing become a spectacle? Was it when royalty first requested a barrel, or when the first merchant offered gold for a single jug? But standing here watching a man trade a silver ring for a mug, you understand. It happened not in a grand moment, but drip by drip. The older monk beside you mutters, "We brew to survive. They drink to forget." Perhaps that's a fair trade. You ask if the monks mind. He shrugs. So long as they leave quietly. You look again at the crowd. Some smile, some stumble. A few light candles before leaving, still pretending this is a place of prayer. But beneath it all, the air carries something ancient. Not judgment, not indulgence, just the quiet understanding that even holiness brews best in barrels, and that sometimes salvation comes one sip at a time. The next morning, light filters through stained glass windows and pools like honey on the cold stone floor. You rise early, earlier than the chants, earlier than the bells. The monastery is hushed, save for the rustle of robes and the soft clink of wooden cups. You're guided to a small breakfast hall tucked behind the herb garden. Inside, a few monks sit quietly, sipping from modest mugs. Nothing unusual, until you notice the smaller figures among them. Children, 3 of them, no older than 10. All barefoot, faces flushed from the cold morning air, robes hanging a bit too loose on their shoulders. One boy yawns. A girl cradles her mug carefully in both hands. A third child sips slowly, eyes half-lidded, like she's already halfway. Back to sleep. You blink. They're drinking beer. You whisper your disbelief to the monk beside you, who only raises an eyebrow. "It's small beer," he says gently. "Less alcohol than a ripened pear." You sit watching as the children eat rough bread and dried fruit, washing it down with the amber liquid. Their mugs steam faintly, warmed slightly by the fire. "It's cleaner than water," the monk explains. "No sickness, no worms, and it helps them sleep, grow, and misbehave." He adds that the beer served to children is a diluted version, barely fermented, almost a broth. But still, by today's standards, the idea seems outrageous. Historians still debate how widespread the practice was, and whether all monastic communities allowed children to drink small beer daily. Some argue it was necessity. Others see it as cultural conditioning. But to these monks it was a matter of health, of survival. You ask where the children came from. Some are orphans, others are sent by poor families hoping the monastery will raise them in faith and feed them well. And we do, the monk says, with bread, with kindness, and with beer. You sip your own mug of morning brew, far stronger. So there's what the children have, and find it earthy, light, almost comforting. A child across the table smiles at you with a missing tooth. Yours is bitter, she says matter-of-factly. Ours tastes like bread soup. You laugh. She's right. There's no ceremony here, no warnings, no debate. Just a small tradition passed down quietly for generations. The monks don't treat the beer as indulgence or taboo. It's simply part of life. You glance around and notice one child nodding off, mug still in hand, the bottom slick with foam. Another picks at a loaf, eyes drooping. The youngest slides to the floor and curls against the warm stone near the hearth, belly full and safe. And for a moment you stop questioning, because in this place, where sickness lurks in well water and comfort is rare, there is something oddly pure about children falling asleep on warm floors, bellies full of bread and beer-like dreams. You return to the brewhouse just before noon, guided by the faint scent of caramelizing grain and wood smoke. The door creaks open, and at first you hear nothing unusual, just the bubbling of mash, the scrape of a ladle, the hiss of hot stone, meeting liquid, but then you hear it, a voice, low, steady, a chant, not in song, not quite, but not in speech either. It hovers somewhere in between, like breath warmed by purpose. You peek inside and see 3 monks working in tandem. One stirs a thick, steaming vat of wort, his movements deliberate and slow. Another stands at a nearby table, measuring dried herbs with fingers so practiced they move without hesitation. The third pours water into a trough lined with stone, whispering words you can't quite make out. They're chanting, not hymns of praise, but phrases tied to rhythm, to action, to repetition. Almost like recipes, but poetic, devotional. 3 turns for the flame, 2 for the grain, 1 for the mercy of the hour. The monk stirring doesn't look up. His chant continues in time with the circular motion of the ladle. It's not performance, it's practice. It's prayer through movement. You stand at the threshold, hypnotized. A 4th monk notices you and gestures to a stool in the corner. You sit quietly, not wanting to disturb the ritual. Historians still debate whether monks of the medieval era incorporated chant directly into brewing, or whether this was a more symbolic connection. Prayers said before or after, not during. But here in this room there is no distinction. Every gesture is sacred, every moment measured in both time and reverence. You watch as the monk crushing herbs pauses before each handful. He whispers, for patience, for clarity, for stillness. Then, he releases the blend into the boil. You wonder what it would be like if modern kitchens cooked this way, if chefs murmured hopes for forgiveness into their soufflés, or baristas prayed as they tamped espresso. Perhaps your meals would taste different, perhaps you would. The monks continue working, they don't glance at one another, they don't need to. Their voices rise and fall in gentle unison, forming a tide that carries the heat, the scent, the very room itself, and then silence. Not the awkward kind, not absence, but fullness. They stop stirring. The chant fades. The monk by the vat dips a ladle into the brew and offers it to you. You sip, and it's as if the words still echo in the liquid itself. You swallow. Warmth, depth, a flavor you can't name, but you feel it, in your throat, in your chest. It lingers, because it wasn't just brewed, it was spoken into being. Later that day, you find yourself outside the brewhouse beneath a fig tree whose shadow stretches lazily across the cloister wall. A young monk sits nearby, knees pulled to his chest, face turned toward the light. He holds a half-empty mug, its contents still steaming faintly in the cool air. You sit beside him without a word. The silence between you is gentle. After a while he speaks. "My first taste," he says quietly. "I thought it was poison." You glance at the mug in his hands. "That bad?" He smiles without looking at you. "Worse, it was honest." You raise an eyebrow. It tasted like everything I was trying not to feel, he explains. Like bitterness, like fear, like all the things I left behind when I took the robe. You listen. It burned my throat, he continues, not because it was strong, because I wasn't ready. The mug tilts in his hands. A single drop falls onto the stone. He finally turns to you. No one tells you that about the first sip. Everyone talks about how beer warms you, comforts you, carries you through the cold. But sometimes the first sip doesn't do that. Sometimes it holds up a mirror. You sit with his words, the weight of them settling into your spine. Historians still debate whether monks drank beer as a tool for reflection or simply out of necessity. But here it's clear, this was more than hydration, it was confrontation. The young monk continues. I drank it again the next day. It tasted different, not sweeter, but less afraid of me. Or maybe I was less afraid of it. He runs a finger along the rim of the mug. They say it takes weeks for the yeast to fully awaken, but sometimes it takes longer for the drinker. He laughs, almost shyly. I still can't drink the darker ones. Too rich, too full of memory. You nod. He offers you a sip from his mug. You take it. It's light, slightly sour, with a trace of warmth that trails behind like the end of a whispered secret. You hand it back. Not bad, you say. He smiles. Not bad at all. You both sit in silence again. This time it's the silence of two people who've shared something. Not just a drink, but the understanding that what we consume often consumes us too. Above you, the fig tree sways. Inside you, something settles. Night falls like ink poured slowly over parchment. The stars emerge one by one, and with them comes a quiet shift in the monastery's rhythm. You sense it immediately, an invisible current beneath the usual silence, a hush that feels less like absence and more like anticipation. A monk approaches you near the herb garden, where the scent of dried fennel and sage still lingers. He doesn't say much, just a single word. Tonight, you follow him. Past the chapel, past the library, down a narrow stone path that leads to a clearing just beyond the outer wall. There, beneath the open sky, monks move with purpose, gathering buckets of water, inspecting bundles of herbs, arranging tools beside a wide copper kettle set above a carefully tended fire. You glance up. The moon is gone, not hidden, not veiled, just not there. New moon. The monk beside you whispers, we only brew this batch when the sky is clean, when even the stars can't see what we put in. You smile, unsure if he's joking. He's not. Another monk approaches with a wooden box. He opens it to reveal an assortment of dried roots, flower buds, and something that looks like blue moss. The air is filled with the subtle, almost electric scent of crushed petals and cool stone. The fire is lit. The kettle begins to warm, and the chanting starts, not from voices but from the world around you. A cricket here, a crackling log there, the hiss of steam escaping the copper like a sigh long held. You notice the monks checking the sky more than the brew. One of them holds a tattered star chart, edges curled like old bark. He nods every so often, then signals with 2 fingers. Another monk stirs. You whisper, "Why the new moon?" He replies, "No distractions, no shadows. The sky is at its most honest." Historians still debate whether monks of the Middle Ages aligned their brewing with lunar phases intentionally or simply followed farming rhythms. But here, it's a sacred order. Some beers are for light, others for darkness. This batch, for darkness, for dreaming, another monk adds. You watch as dried lavender and mugwort are added to the kettle. The scent is strange, comforting and distant at the same time, like something remembered from a dream you weren't sure you had. You're offered a sip of last month's new moon brew. You take it. It's deep, not heavy, but echoing. There's a silence to the taste, like the space between breaths or the pause before a prayer. The flavor disappears slowly, as if reluctant to leave your tongue. The monk beside you murmurs, "Not every batch is meant to be remembered with the mind. Some are meant to return only in sleep." And somehow, you understand, you sit beside the fire, watching the copper kettle gleam beneath a sky stripped bare of moonlight. The monks continue their work with steady hands, guided by stars and memory, blending herbs with heat and time, crafting not just a drink, but a night, a moment, and offering brewed in silence to be consumed in stillness. Dawn breaks slowly, reluctant and pale, casting long fingers of light across the stone corridors. You walk with a monk through the chill of morning, your breath trailing behind you like smoke. You're heading toward the refectory, the communal dining hall, but today no breakfast is served. It's Lent, and for 40 days the monks will not eat, at least not in the way you expect. Inside the hall, the benches are filled with silent, robe-clad figures, each holding a familiar mug. No spoons, no bread, no bowls, only beer. You take a seat at the back. The air smells faintly of yeast and roasted grain. The monk beside you leans in, whispering with a faint smile, "Don't worry, it doesn't break the fast." You blink. "Beer doesn't count as food?" He shrugs. "Not officially, it flows, it's liquid. The rule says no solid meals. This," he raises his mug, "is grace in motion." You take a cautious sip. It's thicker than usual, richer, almost a soup. A liquid loaf of bread. This isn't a casual drink. This is Lenten beer. Historians still debate the origins of this loophole. Some say the monks truly believed beer didn't count as nourishment. Others suggest it was a divine technicality no one dared to correct. A few records even hint at barrels sent to the Vatican for approval, though one legend claims the beer spoiled en route, and the Pope found it so vile he declared it a true form of penance. You look around. No one is indulging. No one is smiling. The mood is solemn. The beer is not celebration, it is sustenance. A single mug is meant to last a meal, or a prayer. The monk next to you adds, "The body still works. The soul must rest." This helps both. You sip again. It's nutty, earthy, faintly sweet. There's a calming weight to it, like warm stone in the belly. You feel full but not heavy, awake but not jittery. It's as if the beer is pacing your body for a longer race. You watch as one. Monk closes his eyes in quiet meditation, mug cradled in both hands like a candle. Another tilts his drink back slowly, deliberately, as if receiving communion. You realize that here in this room, beer is not breaking a rule. It's fulfilling a need, to endure, to remain focused, to honor the fast, not by denying the body, but by feeding it with care. The monk leans back and murmurs, "They say angels drink light, we drink what the earth gives us, but the intention is the same." And in that moment, you understand. The loophole wasn't a trick, it was a mercy. The sun is high, but light barely pierces the thick stone walls of the monastery's oldest wing. You're led down a side corridor you haven't seen before, its walls narrower, the air cooler, the scent sweeter. This is not where the usual brews are made. This is where Lenten beer becomes something else. You enter a vaulted chamber. The ceiling curves like a rib cage above you. The room is dim, but in the center, a single copper kettle gleams beneath shafts of filtered light. Around it, 3 monks move in absolute silence. No chants here, only breath, fire, liquid. A younger monk offers you a small clay cup. No wood this time, no ornament. This isn't for show, you take it, unsure what to expect. The liquid inside is so dark it reflects no light. It clings to the cup like ink, slow and thick. You lift it to your lips. The first taste is molasses, then smoke, then stone fruit and something. Like toasted grain soaked in rainwater, it's heavy, warming, not just in your mouth, but in your chest, your ribs, your spine. It doesn't taste like beer, it tastes like winter letting go. The monk beside you watches your expression, then nods. Bière du jeûne, brewed only during the second half of Lent. Strong, soothing. And slow. He sits with you on a bench carved from old wine barrels. "We don't make much," he says, "just enough for each brother to sleep well and dream better." You glance around. You notice bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Lavender, valerian root, chamomile, mugwort. Sleep herbs, dream herbs. They're steeped into the final boil, he continues. It helps the body rest, but more importantly, it softens the mind. Historians still debate whether monastic breweries intentionally used sedative herbs. in their strongest beers, or whether these ingredients were added for flavor or as part of medieval medicine. But here there is no confusion. The purpose is clear. This beer is not meant for feast, it's meant for letting go. You take another sip. It seems to slow your heartbeat. Or maybe you're just paying attention to it for the first time. You'll feel it in your dreams, the monk says, half smiling. You ask, what will I dream about? He looks up at the high ceiling, where candlelight flickers across ancient stones. Whatever you've forgotten to remember. You sit together in silence, the cup warming your hands long after the beer is gone. Around you, the monks continue. Their work, measured, mindful, tender, as if preparing medicine or memory. And you know this isn't the kind of drink you find in any tavern or bottle. This is beer made for the soul's long winter. Beer brewed not just to nourish, but to heal. The kitchen is quieter than you expect. No clattering pans, no shouted orders, just the low hum of a fire, the soft thud of wooden spoons against iron pots, and the steady rhythm of feet shuffling across worn stone floors. You're invited in, not as a guest, but as an extra pair of hands. The cook, a stocky monk with a face like weathered leather, hands you a burlap sack filled with barley husks. Not for eating, he mutters, for breathing. You follow his instruction, pouring the husks into a pot already warm with steam. A faint, nutty scent fills the room. It smells like patience. All around you, monks are preparing meals, not for today, but for after the fast. Broths, fermented roots, preserved vegetables, each touched with care but never sampled. Not a bite is taken, not a finger licked. You ask quietly, don't you ever sneak a taste? The cook wipes his hands on a cloth, then looks you in the eye. We fast to learn what flavor really is. There's no pride in his voice, no performance. Just truth. He motions to a thick ledger propped open on a table. It's filled not with recipes, but with dates, temperatures, weather notes, and handwritten remarks like, sister's cough faded, added elderflower to brew. Rain lasted 7 days, barley slow to dry. Did not eat, but drank with. Grace, you realize this is more than a kitchen. It's a living document of sacrifice. The beer brewed during these weeks doesn't benefit from taste tests or indulgence. It relies entirely on memory, instinct, and faith and hunger. One monk, thin as a spindle, is stirring a thick mash over the hearth. His lips are moving, not in chant but in counting, not seconds, not measurements. Heartbeats. You help ladle the mash into barrels. Your arms ache. The scent clings to your sleeves like a second skin. No one complains, no one pauses, because here flavor is earned, not chased. Historians often note how monastic brewing was exact, almost scientific. What they rarely mention is the discipline behind it, the unseen hunger, the internal restraint. Every batch is the result of hundreds of silent choices to withhold, to give more than take. As you wipe your hands, you notice a single bowl at the back of the room. Inside, a crust of bread and a small pour of beer, untouched. You ask, whose is that? The cook replies, it's for the one who worked hardest today. You glance around. No one moves toward it. No one watches it. You leave the kitchen hours later, the sun now low in the sky. Your body tired, your stomach hollow, but your heart, unexpectedly, feels full. Because for the first time, you understand. Sacrifice doesn't make the beer taste better. It makes you ready to taste it. Night has returned, draping the monastery in shadows and quiet. You wander through the cloister, the flagstones cool beneath your feet, until you find yourself outside a small chapel tucked between two gardens. There's no service tonight. No candles lit, but the door is open. Inside, a monk kneels alone. You almost turn away, but he gestures gently for you to enter. You sit beside him on the wooden floor. He doesn't speak for a long time. When he finally does, it's as if he's continuing a conversation already in progress. They don't believe me, he says. You glance at him. He's not old, not yet. But there's something ancient in his voice. I've brewed the same batch for 7 years, he continues. The same formula, same ingredients, same steps. But once, just once, it came out different. You wait. Richer, darker. It smelled like frankincense and tasted like forgiveness. He turns to you. And I never wrote it down. You ask why? Because I didn't make it, he says. It came to me, in a dream. You're not sure whether to smile or believe him. Maybe both. He goes on to tell you that during a night of fever, his body weak from fasting, his mind stretched thin by work, he dreamt of a figure in white robes. The figure stood in the brewhouse, whispering into the kettle as steam rose around him. I woke with the measurements already in my mouth, he says, like a song I hadn't heard, but somehow remembered. He brewed that batch the next morning. Just once, and never again. Historians still debate whether monks received divine visions or if long days and longer nights simply frayed their minds into hallucination. But here, within these walls, no one scoffs, because in a place where silence is sacred and repetition is ritual, a dream can feel just as real as fire or grain. You ask if he tried to recreate the recipe. He shakes his head. It wasn't mine. To repeat, you sit together in the dark chapel, listening to the wind outside nudge gently against the old wooden doors. Somewhere far off a kettle hisses in the brewhouse. The monk closes his eyes. I like to think it was a saint, he says, or maybe just some older version of myself, reminding me what beauty tastes like when you're not trying to control. Hit. You look down at your hands, still faintly stained from the day's brewing. You remember every stir, every measure, every moment of restraint, and you wonder how much of what we make is truly ours, and how much simply arrives when we're quiet enough to receive it. Outside, the wind rises. The stars blink silently above the monastery roof, and somewhere deep in the cellars a new batch begins to breathe. The next morning you're summoned without warning. A quiet knock on your door, a bowed head, a simple message. The abbot is ready. You follow the monk through a part of the monastery you haven't seen before, older than the rest. The stones are darker here, smoother, worn down by centuries of bare feet and quiet duty. The air smells not of hops or herbs, but candle wax and dusted vellum. The abbot's chamber is small, humble. Books line the walls. A crucifix hangs over a desk that's cluttered not with relics or gold, but with notes, handwritten brewing logs, weather reports, and sketches of barley heads. This man leads with ink-stained fingers and a brewer's heart. He stands by a wooden cabinet reinforced with iron bands. When he sees you, he nods once, slowly, and gestures for you to come closer. No words yet, just presence. He opens the cabinet. Inside, resting on a bed of linen, is a barrel unlike any you've seen. Not large, not elaborate, but unmistakably different. Its wood is deep and polished, ringed with bands of silver, tarnished but intact. Symbols are etched around the edges, not the rough spiritual glyphs of the other barrels, but precise, clean lines, mathematical, alchemical, and at the top, a single Latin inscription, Unum Dies. One day. You ask the abbot, why is it? Sealed? He looks at you not with secrecy but with gravity, because it is only meant to be opened once. You wait. For the last day, he says softly, when the monastery falls, when no more prayers are whispered, when the fields are bare and the brew kettles are cold. He runs his fingers over the silver rim. We brewed it in the year of plague. When we buried 6 brothers in one winter, we thought, maybe we would not see spring. You feel a chill rise in your spine. We brewed it in silence, he continues. No chant, no laughter, just work and grief. Historians might never know of this barrel. It's not recorded. It's not in any inventory. But in this room, it waits. A final benediction, a quiet ending for a story told in hops and heat. UT. Ask, do you ever think about opening it? He smiles faintly. Sometimes, on days when the snow is too quiet. But then someone laughs in the garden. A child spills a cup. A brother sings while stirring mash. And I remember, we're not done yet. He closes the cabinet. The silver gleams for one last moment before vanishing into the dark. You sit with him in silence, the weight of history humming between you like the slow heartbeat of oak and memory, and you realize this isn't just a monastery, it's a vessel. And somewhere beneath all the rituals and recipes, someone once decided that hope should have a taste, just in case it was ever needed. The monastery used to be a place of echoes, footsteps, whispers, the soft clap of prayer books closing. But lately it's filled with something new. Voices. Lots of them. You hear them before you see them, beyond the eastern wall where the road turns to dust and fields of ribot in the breeze, pilgrims, travellers, traders. Some carry walking sticks, others wear velvet cloaks and gold chains that catch the sun. A few arrive barefoot, their feet cracked from the road. They don't come for relics, they come for beer. You walk with one of the older monks along the wall. He nods toward the crowd, gathering near the entrance. It used to be just the devout, he murmurs. Now we get scholars, nobles, even entertainers. I think one man brought a trained bird last week. You laugh, he doesn't. There was a time, he says, when the silence inside these walls was the thing people craved. Now it's the flavor. At first the monastery resisted. They limited access, refused to sell, posted signs in Latin. No one understood except the monks themselves, but word spread anyway. Miracle beer. Cured a bishop's fever, gives visions, made only by candlelight and moon phases. Myths ferment faster than grain. You watch as a woman in silk kneels near the gate not to pray, but to press her empty flask against the iron bars, hoping for a drop. Historians still debate when monastic beer turned from necessity into legend. Some say it happened the moment it was forbidden. Others point to the scarcity, how something tastes better when it's earned or when it almost can't be had. Inside the monastery, the monks remain unchanged. They stir, they measure, they taste, they pray. But the lines at the gate grow longer. The abbot, always calm, once joked, "We brewed to keep our brothers alive. Now we brew to keep strangers enchanted." He didn't laugh when he said it. You ask a monk what they think of the pilgrims, they remind us of ourselves, he says. Hungry, curious, needing something we can't name. You peek out the small viewing slit in the wooden gate. A child is dancing in the dust while her father waits with an empty jug. A soldier leans against a stone, watching the horizon. A woman closes her eyes, holding her hands out, as if expecting the air to change. And just for a moment you wonder, is it the beer they want, or the belief that something so small, so earthy, so brewed by hand, could carry a kind of salvation? You step back from the gate. Inside, a new batch begins to boil. The courtyard is unusually quiet this afternoon. The pilgrims are gone, the brewing kettles are resting, and the sun casts long golden lines across the stone. You follow the sound of laughter, small, high-pitched, unguarded, and find a group of children in the herb garden, playing a game with sticks and stones. Their robes are too big, their feet too bare, and their faces too bright for a place so full of silence. A monk sits nearby, watching them like a shepherd. At his side, a small wooden cask and a line of tiny mugs carved from clay. You sit beside him and raise an eyebrow. Yes, he says before you even ask. It's beer. You blink. For children? He nods. Small beer. No stronger than rainwater, but safer. He pours a thin stream into one of the mugs and hands it to a boy who runs over, panting from play. The child gulps it without hesitation and rushes off again, muddy and grinning. You watch, baffled. In the city, the monk explains, they drink from wells teeming with sickness. Here we brew even their thirst into something kind. Historians still argue about this practice, whether it was pragmatic or careless. Some see it as enlightened sanitation, others as negligence cloaked in tradition. But in this place, it's not about philosophy, it's about survival. The monk continues, boiled, fermented, cooled and watched. We give them what we ourselves would drink, only gentler. He opens the cask and lets you smell it. The scent is grassy, faintly sweet, like warm bread left in the sun. No hops, he says. Too bitter, just barley, water and a few calming herbs. You ask if the children ever get drunk. He chuckles. Only on the joy of running. The smallest girl toddles over and tugs at your sleeve. You kneel. She hands you a mug barely larger than your thumb. You sip. It tastes like innocence. Not sugary. Not cloying, just soft. The kind of flavor that doesn't insist on being remembered but lingers all the same. The monk watches you. We teach them early, he says, that even what we drink can be mindful. That flavor can be shared without excess. That warmth belongs to everyone. You watch the children roll in the grass, tumbling over one another, small mugs forgotten in the dirt. And you realize, in this place where adults brew to survive sorrow and memory, the youngest drink to belong. No toast, no ritual, just a mug, passed quietly to small hands, and the knowledge that even the smallest lives deserve something carefully made, thoughtfully brewed, and lovingly offered. You're back in the brew house, but something feels different. There's a particular kind of tension in the air, the type that comes when rules are about to be bent or maybe broken. The usual order, the chants, the rituals, they've all been paused, because today one monk is trying something new. He's younger than most, though his robe is already stained from years of labor. His hair is tied back, his sleeves rolled, and his brow creased in the way of someone caught between excitement and quiet heresy. You're invited to watch, but only if you say nothing. You agree. Laid out before him is an array of ingredients you haven't seen used before. Crushed berries, wildflowers, a strange chalky white mold growing on a loaf of old bread, and slices of fruit darkened at the edges, like they're halfway between fresh and forgotten. He whispers to himself as he measures, not prayers this time, but observations. Sourness at the edges, heat at the center, bitterness delayed. You ask what he's making. He doesn't look up. Something true. The monks don't forbid experimentation, but they don't exactly encourage it either. Brewing is sacred, a practice passed down in silence, in repetition, in obedience. Recipes are remembered like psalms. But this monk, he dreams in fermentation. He adds a pinch of dried fig to the mash, then stirs counterclockwise, unusual as most stir clockwise following the sun. He adds the mold next. It floats for a moment, then sinks, dissolving like doubt into the mixture. You lean closer. The smell is different. Still beer, but with something floral and sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes a field. Historians have long speculated about monastic innovation. How much was trial and error? How much was divine inspiration? And how much was simply someone too curious to do only what he was told? You watch the young monk taste a spoonful of the brew and pause, eyes closed. What does it taste like? You ask. He opens his eyes slowly. Like forgetting how things were supposed to taste. You both laugh quietly. Then he turns serious. If it works, it will be wild, alive, untamed. If it fails, it will spoil. You nod. And if it spoils? He smiles. Then we pray and we begin again. He ladles the batch into a small barrel marked with nothing but a blank tag. No symbol, no name, just the date and the word. Perhaps the barrel is sealed and moved into the dark. No fanfare, no chanting, just one monk, one prayer, and one beautiful, controlled rebellion. And as you step back into the light of the main hallway, the scent of berries and bread mold still clinging to your skin, you realize something. Sometimes, even in the oldest houses of order, the truest faith is not in following the recipe, but in writing a new one. The scriptorium is quieter than the chapel. You walk in expecting the scratch of quills and the soft rustle of vellum, and you hear them. But beneath those familiar sounds is another layer, the faint bubbling of fermentation. At the far end of the room, beyond rows of wooden desks and open scrolls, there's a brewing vat, smaller than those in the main brewhouse, but still warm, still active. You blink. One of the monks notices your confusion and smiles. Some write best, he says. When the air smells of barley, you move closer. Here in this room of ink and candlelight, the monks transcribe scripture, copy medical texts, and record dreams. Yet near each desk sits a small clay cup, half full, half forgotten. You notice smudges of ink shaped like fingerprints near the rims. A few scrolls bear faded circles, ghosts of mugs long since emptied. The lines blur between devotion and fermentation. A young monk beckons you to his desk. His fingers are stained dark from ink, his knuckles dusted with flour. From the bread he kneaded before his shift began, he unrolls a parchment. On one half, a Latin translation of the Psalms. On the other, a brewing log. You raise your eyebrows. He shrugs. We write both. He dips his quill again. The ink smells faintly of iron and hops. I spill often, he admits. ink into wort, wort onto parchment. But it all goes in the same direction, forward. You sit beside him and look closer. Some words blur into each other. You can't tell if the dark blotches are ink or beer. And strangely, it doesn't seem to matter. Historians sometimes dismiss these dual-purpose documents as messy, irreverent, or confusing. But here among the monks they are understood differently. The line between sacred and ordinary is not a wall. It's a breath. The monk beside you murmurs, "The psalms speak to the soul, but a good brew speaks to the body, and both keep us alive." He hands you a scrap of paper torn from the edge of a ruined scroll. It reads, "God made water, man made beer. We live somewhere in between." You smile, and then you notice another monk dipping his quill directly into a cup of dark beer, mixing it with ink before writing. You raise a brow again. "It binds better," he says without looking up, "and it smells nicer after." You sit, in silence, watching the ink dry, the steam rise, and the monks breathe their prayers into both scripture and brewing logs. And for a fleeting moment, you feel like you're reading something older than words. Something brewed, something lived. It's nearly midnight when you wake, not from noise but from silence. A different kind, a pressurized silence. The kind that suggests someone is trying not to be heard. You rise from your cot, wrap yourself in your robe, and follow the faintest flicker of lamplight down the corridor. Through the archway, past the inner garden, you slip behind a hanging tapestry near the southern wall. Voices. 2 monks. Older. Familiar. You crouch behind a pillar, not intending to spy, but unable to stop yourself. The conversation isn't loud, but it carries. "It's distraction," one says, voice tight with frustration. "We brew more than we pray." The other replies calmly, "We pray while we brew." The first scoffs, "No, we chant while we brew. That's not the same." You hear the creak of a bench shifting. "We were called to serve the spirit, not the senses," the first continues. This obsession with perfecting taste, refining recipes, pleasing outsiders, it's creeping into the soul. The second pauses, then speaks softly. "What is holiness without hospitality?" Silence then. "What is God, if not in the details?" You can almost hear the tension crackling, like steam caught under a lid. The first voice softens, but not with surrender. "I just worry that somewhere, between grain and yeast and flame, we've lost the reason we came here." A long silence follows. The second monk replies, barely above a whisper, "And yet when I stir the mash I feel closer to the divine than I ever have in a pew." Historians rarely speak of these private struggles, internal debates within the cloistered walls, but surely they happened. Faith isn't static. It ferments like everything else here, sometimes sweet, sometimes sour, always alive. You don't hear the rest. Footsteps approach from another hall and you slip away unnoticed, heart pounding. Later that night, lying awake, you think about the tension between labor and love, between ritual and reverence, between making something beautiful and forgetting why you make it. You remember the words, "What is God, if not in the details?" And perhaps, somewhere between those 2 monks, between steam and silence, is the truest prayer this monastery ever speaks. It starts with footsteps, not the slow, soft shuffle of monks in prayer. These are quicker, intentional, measured, but furtive. You're awake again, restless from the argument you overheard earlier. Curiosity still hums in your veins. So when you hear those footsteps just outside your cell, you follow, down a side corridor, past the herb storeroom, through the cool stone hallway that leads to the lower cellars. You stay in the shadows. The flicker of a lantern ahead bobs like a ship, lost at sea. The light reveals a hooded figure, not a stranger but a monk, dragging something behind him. You hear the unmistakable creak of a wooden cart and the low slosh of liquid shifting inside a barrel. He moves carefully, avoiding the main stairwell. You realize he's headed toward the back gate, the one rarely opened, the one that leads not to fields or gardens but to the edge of the forest. You stay hidden until he stops. He sets the lantern down, pauses, then kneels beside the barrel, places both hands on it, Not to open it, but to hold it like a farewell. You step into the light. He turns, startled but not panicked. You recognize him. A monk from the brewhouse, quiet, precise, always kept to himself. You ask softly, "What are you doing?" He hesitates, then answers, "Delivering grace." You raise an eyebrow. He gestures toward the forest. There's a widow at the edge of the village. Her son's sick. Nothing helps. The priest brought relics. The physician brought leeches. "I'm bringing this." You look at the barrel. It's not large. Marked with a red thread, one of the stronger healing batches, brewed with elderflower, honey and rosemary, not meant to leave the monastery. "You know this breaks the rules," you say. He nods. "So does grief." Historians rarely record acts like this, small, quiet rebellions driven not by disobedience, but by mercy. Yet you know without being told that this monk won't write this in his logs, won't ask forgiveness, won't expect praise. You step aside. He nods once, grateful, tired, and wheels the cart into the night, lantern swinging like a star, too, low in the sky. Later, as you return to your cot, you wonder how many other barrels have left the monastery under moonlight, how many rules have bent, not to pride, but to love, and how many saints smiled in silence, saying nothing. Because sometimes, the holiest thing you can do is give something away. It begins with a whisper, not from a monk, but from the walls themselves. Cold stone remembers what parchment forgets. And tonight, beneath a slate-colored sky, you're told a story the brothers rarely speak aloud. You're in the apothecary, helping. Crush dried rosemary when an elder monk, his hands gnarled like olive branches, pauses. He stares at the pestle in your hand and murmurs, "We stopped brewing once, for 3 winters." You look up. "Why?" He doesn't answer immediately. He sets down his tools, walks to a locked cabinet and opens it with a key hung beneath his robe. Inside is a small sealed jar. The contents are cloudy, amber liquid turned murky grey. He places it gently on the table. This is what remained. You, "Don't touch it," he nods. "We brewed it like always, same grain, same water, same prayer. But something was wrong. It smelled off. Tasted sour like mold, but not of mold. Brothers fell ill. One never woke. The jar hums with quiet threat, even sealed. No one could explain it. No rot, no contamination we could find, but each sip seemed to forget what it was. You ask why they didn't discard it. He says, "We feared losing what it taught us." You stare at the jar, at the way the liquid clings to the glass like it still wants to speak. Historians have no record of this event, no illness reported. No shutdown logged, but monastic histories are often oral, and what is too heavy for ink is left to memory. "For 3 winters," he continues, "we sealed the kettles, prayed instead of brewed. The silence was louder than boiling water ever was." You ask what changed. "One spring," he says, "we opened the cellar and found a barrel, untouched, unmarked, and inside, clear, sweet beer. Cold, but alive. We never learned who brewed it." You wait. And so, he finishes, "we began again, but slower." You look again at the jar. It sits between you and him like a wound never stitched. He adds almost gently, "Some say we invited something into the brew. Others say it was our pride, trying too hard to perfect what should be simple." He locks the jar away, and you realize, not every holy thing is meant to be drunk. Some are meant to be remembered or feared, or both. The brew house is alive again. Steam rises in gentle spirals. Herbs hang from the rafters, and a warm, rich scent rolls across the stones. Malt, fire, and the promise of something almost ready. You find yourself drawn to the corner table where a monk is preparing a fresh batch of hops. At first everything seems ordinary, but then you catch the monk muttering under his breath, not in prayer, but something sharper, bitter. You catch only one word repeated over and over, greed. You ask gently, "Something wrong with the hops?" He doesn't look up. They were brought by a merchant, from far away, paid for by a noble who doesn't even drink beer, just wants his seal on a barrel. He tosses a dried cone onto the table. It lands with a little crack, more brittle than it should be. Too young. Picked too soon. Grown in fields where nothing rests. You pick one up. It's pale. lighter than the others, almost hollow. He sees your hesitation. They'll give the beer bite, a sharpness that cuts through everything, but not depth, not peace. He sighs. It's not the bitterness that bothers me, it's the intention. You ask if he'll still use them. He shrugs. Sometimes a lesson needs to be tasted. Historians often overlook the emotional ethics of monastic brewing. Recipes, yes, methods, of course, but rarely do records mention the way ingredients carry memory, how hops grown in love yield warmth, and those bought in haste or vanity brew only restlessness. The monk adds a handful of the pale hops to the kettle. The scent changes immediately, sharper, harsher, astringent. He winces slightly. Not every bitterness is holy. You help him stir. The mixture froths, spits, resists. It doesn't want to calm. The steam stings your eyes. You blink back tears. You didn't expect. He lowers the heat. When we brew with resentment, it seeps into the barrel. You ask what he'll do with this batch. We'll finish it, he says. But we'll keep it for ourselves as reminder. You glance at the label he ties to the barrel, a single word, etched with a knife rather than a quill. Want. Later, as you leave the brewhouse, the bitter steam still clinging to your robes, you realize something quietly powerful. It's not the bitterness that ruins the brew. It's the reason behind it. It starts with a wink. You're helping stack old hymnals in the library, thick with dust and long-forgotten annotations, when a monk with ink-stained fingers slides a book aside and taps the back of a shelf. A quiet click, a shift of wood, and suddenly, a door. You glance at him. He just nods. You didn't hear this from me, he whispers, already turning back to his work. You step through. The hidden room is small, cramped, lit by a single high window spilling honey-colored light across a work table. Shelves line every wall, but these aren't Bibles or hymns. These are logs, not the official brewing records, the ones you've seen in the refectory or storeroom, but something else. Something older, something more honest. Handwritten journals bound in leather, scrolls rolled in twine, loose pages scattered like autumn leaves. You pick one up, Latin, scrawled sideways into the margins. Today I brewed under doubt, it tasted like patience. Another entry, this one in code, a series of glyphs resembling brewing marks but subtly altered. Beneath it, a small note in faded ink. For those who know how to read without reading. You run your fingers along a row of spines. Some are labeled with only dates, others bear names of monks long since gone. One bears no title at all, just a burn mark across the front. You open it. Inside are recipes, strange ones, brewing with wild pear skins, salted herbs, even powdered bark. Ratios scratched out, redrawn, rethought. Margin notes argue with themselves, too bitter, not bitter enough. Tasted like memory. Keep it. This is not chaos, it's curiosity, organized rebellion. The monks who kept these records were not heretics, they were seekers. You find one scroll written entirely in verse. If prayers can rise, why not with yeast? Let every batch become a feast. Let spirit steep in barley deep and wake us gently from our sleep. Historians rarely mention these hidden archives. Most focus on the formal, the approved, the repeated. But what you hold now is the monastery's shadow heart, the sacred in experimentation, the quiet defiance in the act of asking what if. You spend hours reading, lost in symbols, sketches, and scent notes that make no sense until they suddenly... You realize, these monks weren't trying to escape tradition. They were trying to understand it, to taste it from all angles, to make sure that even in obedience, there was room for wonder. Before you leave, you place the scroll back carefully, and on a whim leave a note of your own. Found this room by accident, left changed on purpose. Then you seal the shelf behind you and return to the visible monastery, carrying with you a secret older than scripture that even the most sacred recipes must be questioned to remain sacred. The wind has shifted, warmer now, carrying the scent of soil and blooming vines. It's the first true day of spring, and the monastery stirs with a gentle energy, not haste, not celebration, just softness. You find Brother Matthias in the garden, seated on a bench beneath a canopy of flowering branches. He's older than most, with a face lined not from age but from joy, like the creases in well-loved parchment. He holds a small mug clay chipped at the rim. The liquid inside gleams golden in the light. You sit beside him without speaking. After a moment he raises the mug and says, "They didn't believe me, you know." You glance at him. When I told them what I saw, you wait. It was the first batch of spring brew, honey, rosemary, elderflower, and a touch of orange peel, meant to be light, cleansing, hopeful. He chuckles. I drank one sip, just one, and I saw saints, you smile. Saints? He nods, laughing, barefoot, sitting in the field behind the brewhouse. One of them had ale on his robes, another played a flute badly. It was beautiful. You laugh. He doesn't. They weren't preaching. They weren't judging. They were resting, breathing, like they'd just finished digging a garden together. He sips again. And I thought, if heaven feels like that, I wouldn't mind going. Historians would dismiss such visions, chalk them up to exhaustion, malnutrition, or the light delirium of fermentation. But Brother Matthias is not mad. He is certain. You know what they told me, he says, turning to you. You shake your head. We don't need worship, they said. We need someone to taste the world with wonder. You sit in silence for a long time. Then he adds, they vanished after the second sip. I think they knew one was enough. You ask if he's ever tried to recreate the batch. He nods. Every year. But it never tastes the same. I think they only visit when your heart's empty enough to notice them. You sip from your own mug, handed to you without fanfare. The beer is floral, light, slightly citrusy. You don't see saints, but you do feel something unclench inside you, a kindness, a letting go. Brother Matthias leans back, closes his eyes and smiles. Some people look for God in books, he says. Me? I wait for spring. And with that, you both sit quietly in the garden, the air full of birdsong and barley, not expecting anything, just ready if something gentle decides to arrive. The cooper's shed stands at the edge of the monastery grounds, tucked just beyond the herb garden and half-shadowed by tall cypress trees. You wouldn't have noticed it, except for the rhythmic knock, wood meeting iron, over and over, like a heart with a hammer. You follow the sound. Inside, the air is thick with sawdust and steam. It smells of oak, smoke, and old sweat, the scent of labor that doesn't ask for praise. A single monk works here, sleeves rolled, face streaked with ash. He doesn't stop when you enter. Instead, he lifts a curved stave of wood, bends it slowly against a frame and mutters a short phrase under his breath, a prayer maybe, or a measurement. You sit quietly and watch. He lines up the staves, 12 of them, around a metal hoop like petals around a flower. Each curve is different. Each grain speaks its own language, and yet he finds the harmony. The second hoop slides down. The barrel begins to take shape. He finally speaks. You think we make beer, he says, but really we make containers. You nod slowly. The beer lives, he continues. It breathes, it changes. Our job isn't to perfect it, it's to give it shelter. Historians often overlook this part of the process, the barrels. They're seen as tools, not as theology. But here, within these walls, the cooper's work is sacred. He shows you a set of markings carved inside one barrel, never visible once sealed. Not for decoration, not for others, just for the monk and perhaps for the beer itself. A circle. A star, a name. This one, he says, was made after Brother Alric died. He loved his brews sharp and cold. I make this one thinner. It breathes faster. He runs his hand along the rim. Some beers need to breathe more. Some need to rest longer. You can't force flavor, you have to listen to it. He picks up a thin strip of bark and wraps it around the inside seam. Oak for strength, ash for sweetness. If it creaks too early, I know it'll leak. You ask if barrels ever explode. He grins. Only when we forget to respect them, you help him hoist the finished frame onto a rack. He tightens the last band, then pours a cup of hot water inside and listens. No leaks, just a faint hiss, as if the wood is sighing in relief. Every barrel is different, he says, even if they look the same. like monks, like prayers, like mornings. You nod, then he hands you a carving knife and a small, narrow stave. "Mark this one," he says. "Whatever you want. Whatever you need it to remember." You hesitate. Then slowly you carve a small shape. A crescent moon and a wave. You don't know why, but somehow the barrel does. You find the map by accident. You're helping to rebind an old volume in the monastery's tiny archive, its pages brittle, its spine barely holding on, when something flutters loose from between the vellum sheets. It's folded into quarters, soft with age, the edges worn as if passed through many hands. You unfold it gently. Not a map of land, not rivers or borders or cities, but a yeast map. At first, it looks abstract. Circles, dots, and swirling lines marked in brown, gold, and a strange pale green. Alongside each cluster is a symbol: a barrel, a crescent moon, a grain stalk, a tiny flame. A few are labeled with words in Latin, some clear, others smudged by time and damp. A monk appears beside you, silent as mist. He doesn't look at the map, just says softly, "You found Brother Amon's guide." You turn to him, waiting. "He believed yeast had memory," the monk says, "that the air itself changed depending on where you were, how you felt." "What?" "Prayers," you whispered. He leans over, pointing to one spiral drawn in pale ink. "This spot," he says. "Brewed after a funeral. The batch was darker, drier. Not bitter, but distant. We didn't know why at the time." You ask what the map shows. "Not ingredients," he says. "Impressions where certain brews were started, what was happening in the monastery that day, how the room felt." Historians might laugh. There's no record of Brother Amon's theories in official documents. But here, held in your hands, is evidence of a deeper understanding, less scientific, more spiritual. Yeast listens, the monk continues. It absorbs. It remembers what we forget. You stare at the map. Some parts are almost completely blank. Others so crowded with tiny notations they're unreadable. One corner has a simple line drawn across it, marked "Winter Batch, sung with tears." You wonder if beer made from joy tastes different from beer made in mourning. You suspect it does. The monk taps the bottom of the page, a small phrase, barely visible. Not all flavors come from the tongue. You fold the map and return it to the book, where it slept for decades. The pages seem to sigh as you press them closed. You carry the weight of it in your chest as you leave. Not knowledge, exactly, but something closer to awe, that even the tiniest organisms might carry memory, and that every sip might be a page from a story you can only taste, but never read. The air is heavy tonight, still, too still. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. You walk through the cloisters under a moonless sky, guided only by the flickering light of a lantern held by a monk whose face is drawn and pale. He says nothing. You don't ask. Something has shifted. When you round the corner near the infirmary, you smell it before you see it. Smoke, herbs, and underneath it all, fear. Inside, several cots line the walls, each with a figure resting beneath woolen blankets. Some shiver, others lie still. A bowl of water sits untouched beside each bed. The monks tending to them wear scarves soaked in vinegar and wrap rosary beads twice around their wrists. You look to the elder monk standing at the back of the room. His face is tired, his voice barely above a whisper. "It started with a cough," he says. "You don't need to ask what it is. The plague has come." He leads you into a smaller room at the rear of the infirmary. Shelves line the walls, once stocked with tinctures and bandages. But now most jars are empty. Only one barrel remains, sealed, marked with a symbol you recognize from the yeast map. A spiral, pierced by a single downward slash. The fever. Batch. "We brewed it when the last healer left," the monk explains. "No more medicine, no more time, just hope." He pours you a small cup. It's dark, bitter, thick with the taste of elderflower, pepper, and a metallic tang like copper, and storm clouds. You sip cautiously. It burns, not painfully, but purposefully, like it knows why it's here. "This beer," the monk says, "was made with everything we had. What little honey remained. Herbs from the altar garden, water from the deepest well." He touches the barrel with a reverence usually reserved for relics. We drank it, we prayed, we waited. You ask if it helped. He nods, but slowly. Some lived. Some didn't. But we stopped dying all at once. The fever slowed. Our hands steadied. Historians often credit medieval monks with early forms of medicinal brewing, but few mention how those brews were born, not in laboratories, but in desperation. Faith and silence, you help carry mugs to the infirmary. The sick drink slowly. The heat in the beer seems to fight the cold inside them. No one speaks, but in the quiet, something settles. You glance at the monks moving carefully between the beds. They don't look afraid anymore, just steady, prepared. You stay until morning, not to help, just to witness. Because sometimes the sacred isn't in survival. It's in what we choose to do when we fear we won't. You've passed the narrow wooden door 100 times before, but today it's open. Just a crack. Inside the air is thick, warm, yeasty, humid with the scent of fermenting grain. You hesitate, 1 foot across the threshold, when a voice calls. From the shadows, "Don't knock, it disturbs the rhythm." You freeze, then enter. The room is small, rounded like a silo. No windows. Just wooden barrels stacked in rings, some taller than you. Every surface is damp with condensation. The air thrums, not with noise exactly, but with presence. In the center sits a monk, cross-legged, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. He hasn't shaved. His robe is patched, stained, threadbare, but his face is calm. Still, he gestures. To a stool across from him. You sit. He opens his eyes slowly, like waking from a long dream. "I've been here 10 years, he says. You nod. By choice. You wait for explanation. He offers none. Instead, he points toward the nearest barrel. It's singing. You listen. You hear the soft pop of bubbles breaking the surface, a low hiss like distant rain, wood creaking as it shifts, liquid murmuring inside its oak cage. You hear that? He asks. That's not fermentation. That's prayer. You glance at him. He smiles. Every beer has a voice. You just have to be still enough to listen. Historians tend to omit monks like him, too eccentric to canonize, too peaceful to punish. But in every generation, someone steps sideways from the path and sits with what others rush past. Some brothers think, "I'm mad," he continues. Others bring me bread. You ask if he ever leaves. He shakes his head. Why would I? I have company. He stands slowly, places his ear against a barrel. Then, almost reverently, he says, "This one's lonely. She's fermenting too fast." He adjusts the heat of the stone hearth beneath the vat. You ask what he believes God sounds like. He doesn't hesitate. Like a slow bubble, like patience under pressure. You look around again. The barrels are breathing. Not literally, but you feel it now. The pulse of change, the quiet surrender of grain to time. He turns back to you. Most people pray for answers, he says. I just listen to the questions. You leave him there, in the damp dark, listening. Not because he's strange, but because somehow it all makes sense. You find the journal in a drawer that sticks. It's buried beneath worn napkins, empty ink pots and a small wooden spoon with teeth marks on the handle. The drawer creaks when you pull it free, loud enough to make a nearby monk glance up, then return to bottling without a word. The journal is bound in green leather, faded almost grey. No title, just a small copper clasp shaped like a barley sprig. You open it, inside, handwriting, loose, looping, alive. Not logs, not recipes, tastings. Each page is dedicated to a batch of beer, but not in the way you expect. No measurements, no temperatures. Just entries that read more like poetry than process. Batch 117 first sip tasted like a memory I don't have. Second sip made my fingers twitch. Third sip, suddenly I remembered my mother's laugh. Batch 203 too sharp. Like a truth told too early. Left a taste like unfinished arguments. You flip further. Some pages are tear-stained. Others bear fingerprints in dried ink or faint rings from mugs set down too quickly. Batch 88 tasted like the sky right before rain. I drank it while grieving. It didn't heal me, but it stayed. One page is blank except for a single line. Batch 99 I shouldn't have shared it. You ask a monk nearby whose journal it was. Brother Lorian, he says. He's gone now, died with a smile and a mug in hand. You laugh gently. He didn't rate the beer, the monk continues. He rated how it felt. That was his gift. You flip to the last entry. Batch 314 made on a cold day. Tasted warm, like forgiveness. No notes needed. You close the journal and hold it for a long moment. It's soft in your hands, not because the leather has aged, but because the pages carry. Emotion like cloth soaked in sunlight. Every batch, every moment, every vulnerability. Captured not in data, but in feeling. You realize this wasn't just a brewer's log. It was a confessional, a mirror, a map of one man's journey through time and taste, documented not in pursuit of perfection, but in honor of presence. You return the journal to the drawer, and you write one new line on the last page. This one tasted like listening. The garden smells of thyme and clover, warmed by the sun and stirred gently by the breeze. Bees hum lazily near the lavender. Somewhere behind the hedgerow, a fountain trickles, steady, soft, like the breath of the earth. You find him seated on a worn stone bench. Brother Elric, blind since birth, or so the others say. No one knows for certain. He doesn't speak of it, and no one asks. His eyes are clouded but kind, and his smile is the kind that waits for you to earn it. In his lap, a small wooden tray holds 4 clay mugs, each filled with a different beer. You sit beside him. He tilts his head toward you. You're the one who listens, he says. You pause. Sometimes. Then sit, taste, and tell me what you see. You hesitate. He smiles. Yes, see. Taste is just sight turned inward. You lift the first mug. It's warm, faintly citrusy, a touch of clove at the back of the throat. You try to describe it. He interrupts. No, don't tell me flavors. Tell me what it reminds you of, what it shows you. You close your eyes. A field, maybe. Summer, running, a laugh, yours or someone else's. The mug in your hand trembles. Slightly. You tell him. He nods. Good. That one's meant to taste like a memory, almost remembered. You try the next, darker, roasted, bitter, but with something round beneath. You say, it feels like walking home after an argument you didn't win, but should have, he chuckles. Batch 212. Brewed after the abbot lost his voice, it carries silence. The third is sharper, cold, even in the sun. You see frost on a window. Your fingers sting. A scarf tight at your neck. The comfort of being cold together. You tell him. He sighs. That one always made me feel seen. Historians never wrote about Brother Elric. No records mention a blind taster. But everyone in the monastery knows he doesn't taste with his tongue, he perceives. The eyes deceive, he says softly. They look at labels, at foam, at color, but the mouth tells the truth. You ask if he misses sight. He turns toward you. I see every day, he says. I just don't waste time looking. You lift the 4th mug. The scent is subtle, barely there. You sip, and suddenly nothing else matters, just warmth and stillness. Like kneeling at the edge of a dream. You say nothing. He nods. That one's not ready yet, but it will be. You sit in the garden, the world blooming around you, not seeing, just sensing, and you finally understand what Brother Elric has always known, that the best brews don't speak to your mouth, they speak to your soul. You descend into the archive just after Vespers. The air is cool, dry, and scented faintly of wax and old paper. The stone walls muffle the world outside, giving the room a cathedral hush. Rows of scrolls, bound ledgers, and dusty brewing manuals line the shelves, interrupted only by 2 small oil lamps casting golden pools of light. At the center table, a thick manuscript, its cover cracked and worn, its spine lovingly repaired again and again. You're not alone. An older monk sits nearby, running his fingers over the page. He looks up, sees you, and smiles, but there's weariness behind it. He gestures for you to sit. This, he says, was supposed to be the recipe for the perfect beer. He opens the book. The pages are meticulously kept. Diagrams, temperature, logs, yeast strains, barley gradings, a symphony of precision. Every line measured, every entry cross-referenced. We worked on it for 6 years, he says. Brother Petrus and I. We wrote it like scripture. Believed if we got everything exactly right, we could brew something eternal. He traces a line of numbers with his thumb. And in the end, we did. It was flawless. The foam held for hours. The clarity was like glass, the flavor balanced, refined, pure. You wait for the smile, it doesn't come, he continues. Everyone praised it, we bottled it, labeled it with gold ink. We thought we'd reached heaven. You ask what happened. He closes the book softly. No one asked for a second glass. You blink. Why not? He shrugs. It had no soul. Historians might admire the record, the complexity, the control. But they wouldn't know what the brothers felt as they sat in silence, sipping their perfect beer, waiting for something to stir, and feeling nothing. We brewed out the mystery, he says. Left no room for surprise, no joy in the edge. He stands and pulls another bottle from a lower shelf. Dusty, unlabeled, slightly misshapen. This, he says, was a mistake. We forgot the coriander, overheated the mash, bottled it anyway. He pours you a glass, you sip, it's strange. Alive, slightly off, completely unforgettable. He smiles. Perfection doesn't linger, he says, but imperfection, that stays. With you. You look back at the manuscript, immaculate, untouched, and realize it isn't a recipe anymore, it's a warning, a reminder that grace doesn't live in control, it lives in the moment you almost lost it. The northern path is wilder than the rest of the monastery grounds, less manicured, less visited. The stone walkway gives way to mossy soil, and the low garden walls dissolve into thickets of bramble and tall, whispering grass. It feels like a border, not between land and land, but between the monastery. And something older. You're here to find the wild hops. The monks speak of them only in passing, the northern vines, they call them, as if naming them might tame them. But nothing tames this place, not the wind that moves in strange spirals. Not the vines that refuse to grow straight, not the silence which hums like a held breath. You step off the path and see them, hops clinging to the crumbled remains of a stone arch, vines like question marks, cones that don't look uniform, some green, others tinged with gold, a few dark as dusk. Brother Aldwin appears behind you, as if grown from the wind itself. You feel it? He asks. You nod. It's the wind, he says. Changes everything. He kneels beside a cluster of vines and plucks a single hop. These aren't tended, not pruned, not rotated. They grow how they want, drink what the rain gives them, listen to the wind more than to us. You hold one of the cones to your nose. It smells unpredictable, sharp, then sweet, then something you can't quite place, like salt water and old stories. Brother Aldwin smiles. The wind here comes from the sea, sometimes from the east, sometimes from the mountains. Each gust carries something, dust, pollen, memory. You laugh. You think the wind flavors them? He looks at you seriously. I know it does. Historians might scoff. They record terroir, the influence of soil, climate, and cultivation, but they rarely include the idea that the wind itself might shape taste. But here, under the tangle of vines, it makes sense. You can't brew the same beer twice with these. Aldwin continues, even if you harvest the same way, use the same kettle, every batch from these hops has a different mood. He picks 3 cones and places them in your hand. Try them side by side sometime, he says. One will taste like longing, one will taste like laughter, one like a storm that didn't quite arrive. You ask if the monks use them often. He shakes his head, only when we're willing to be surprised. You stay there a while listening to the breeze. It dances through the hops, touches your face, curls around your ears like a secret, and for a moment you believe that flavor can be carried on the wind. That unpredictability isn't something to fear, it's something to taste. The first sip happens before dawn, not at a service, not in the brewhouse, and never in public. There's no bell, no chant, no proclamation, just 5 monks, 1 wooden table, and a single candle. You're invited, but not formally. A quiet knock on your door, a glance, a nod, no words. You follow barefoot through the cold stone halls, past the cloisters still soaked in sleep, until you reach a small chapel off the kitchen wing. Inside, a round table, worn smooth by centuries, of elbows, spills, and prayer. The candle flickers in its center. Around it sit the chosen monks, each one different in age, posture, and mood, some smiling faintly, some still groggy. One already humming under his breath. At the table's center stands a clay jug, unmarked, sealed with a bit of beeswax and twine. The newest batch. Brother Tom, quiet, deliberate, lifts the jug and breaks the seal. The pop is soft, sacred. He pours 5 equal measures into 5 identical mugs. Then he sets the jug down and steps back. No one touches their mug. Not yet. They sit and they wait. Exactly 1 minute. You count the seconds in your head, but the moment expands. The candle crackles. The liquid steams faintly. You can smell it now, fresh, floral, something toasted beneath, but no one comments, no one moves. This is the ritual. This is the silence. The beer must be heard before it is tasted. Finally, Brother Tom lifts his mug. The others follow. Together, they raise it slightly, not high, not dramatically, just a gesture of offering. Then all 5 sip, no toasts, no praise. They swallow, set the mugs down. Still silent. Then, one by one, they begin to smile. A soft laugh from the youngest, a sigh from the oldest. Brother Tom simply nods, eyes closed. Only then does anyone speak. Alive, someone whispers. Balanced, another says. A third murmurs, it knows. You don't ask what it knows, you understand. Historians don't record this rite. There's no parchment, no rule, no liturgical mention of the first sip. But it's older than the brewing logs. Older than most things here. It's the moment the monks offer not a product but a presence. Not a drink but a listening. Because beer here isn't just consumed, it's witnessed. You're offered the 6th mug. You sip, and the flavor settles into your chest like light through stained glass. Warm, unexpected, quiet, you don't speak. The beer has already heard what it needed. The sketchbook is found under the brew house floorboards. Not buried, just tucked away, wrapped in oilcloth. A little warped from damp, but intact. You find it when you're helping replace cracked tiles near the hearth. No one claims it. No one admits to placing it there. But the way it's hidden, carefully, lovingly, suggests it was meant to wait. You peel back the cover. Not parchment. Not recipes, drawings, dozens of them. Charcoal, ink, faint watercolor washes that have bled at the edges like dreams on waking. Each page is its own tiny world. You turn the first page, a brewing kettle with wings, steam that curls into the shape of a lion's mane, a monk stirring a barrel while fish swim through the air around him. Their scales shimmering in gold leaf. You flip faster. Beers sketched like people, tall and aloof, small and mischievous, one drawn entirely as a sleeping child curled inside a tankard. Another, ingredients that don't exist. Cloudberry moss. Sunlight. Steeped in silence. Laugh root, only found after arguments. You laugh softly. A monk peers over your shoulder and smiles. Brother Anselm's book. You glance up. He was strange, the monk says affectionately. Didn't talk much, but always drew while the wort boiled. Said the steam gave him visions. You turn another page, a barrel that weeps, a glass that blooms, a bottle with legs, sprinting toward the forest. You ask if he ever brewed anything. From the book, the monk shakes his head. He said they weren't meant to be brewed, just imagined. Historians have never seen this. They'd dismiss it. Too fanciful, too odd, too undisciplined for the austere image of monastic life. But this, there's no child's notebook. It's a theology of wonder. You realize Brother Anselm didn't just brew beer, he brewed possibility. Sometimes, the monk beside you says, when the batch doesn't feel right, we flip through his drawings. Let something strange guide. Hus? You nod slowly, because sometimes the holiest ingredient is a question you never ask out loud. They still whisper his name, Brother Sylvan, not with fear, not with reverence, with curiosity, because no one ever figured out quite what happened to him. You find his name only once in the abbey logs, scribbled beside a single entry. Attempt number 7, for angels. You smile at first. A monk brewing beer for angels. It sounds like fable, but then you follow the notes tucked behind an old hymnal, stained with lavender oil and something metallic. Sylvan's theory was simple. and wild. If bread could be made, holy, if wine could become sacred, then maybe beer, brewed right, could reach heaven. His idea to brew not for the living, but for the listening. He collected dew at dawn, used yeast found only on white lilies, boiled his wort under silence, prayed between each stir. The hops were plucked during vespers, the water blessed. Every ingredient touched only by candlelight. And the yeast? It came from an old songbook. He scraped it from the spine, claiming the notes held invisible life. The batch was brewed on the spring equinox. No one saw him for 3 days. Then, on the 4th, he left a single bottle at the altar, uncorked. By morning, it was empty. No one confessed to tasting it. No one saw him again. Just a folded note on his cot. Too sweet for men. Too sad for heaven. Let it live somewhere in between. The bottle remained in the archives for years, though dust never clung to it, no label, no scent. Just a faint warmth that lingered long after you left the room. Historians write him off as eccentric, a monk too, lost in metaphor, but every few decades someone finds a page, a drawing, a chord, a faint scent of rosewater in the brewing hall with no source, and someone always says, maybe he got it right. You look now at his brewing notes. No recipe, just 3 words, underlined, grace, absence, light. You don't know if he brewed for angels, but maybe, just maybe, he brewed for the part of us that listens when the world goes quiet. The abbey graveyard lies behind the chapel wall, quiet, shaded and soft underfoot. Moss grows over the stones, ivy curls around the names. Birds sing here, but softly, as if aware they're interrupting something older than grief. You come here. With Brother Felix, he walks with a slight limp, but his steps are steady. He carries a basket, not of flowers but of cork-sealed bottles. You pass rows of headstones, simple, carved with crosses, the occasional Latin phrase and, in some cases, a small etched symbol of a barrel or a mug or a hop vine. Brother Felix stops before one stone, then kneels. He places a bottle gently at its base. You ask, Brother Alaric, he says, loved our winter stout, said it reminded him of his mother's kitchen. When he was dying, he asked if we'd brew one last batch, said he wanted to rest with it, and they did. The monks brewed it, poured a bottle, sealed it, and buried it. With him, just beneath the roots of a birch tree. You glance around. There are others, small marks on the stones, some subtle, others clear, a wheat stalk, a flame, a tiny drawn corkscrew. Not many ask, Felix says. But when they do, we honor it. You ask why. He looks at you. Because beer isn't just what we drink, it's how we lived, what we shared, what we held on to in silence or laughter or prayer. Historians rarely mention this. They write of relics and rosaries, but not of the simple, quiet requests made by old monks with failing hands and clear eyes. They don't record the tears shed when that final batch was poured, or how the room smelled of spice and wood smoke, or how someone whispered, he would have liked this one. Felix gestures to another stone. She wanted her favorite, bottled and forgotten, said it was hers, and hers alone. We honored that too. You. Pause at one grave. No name, just a circle carved into the stone. And beneath it, faint script. Not the brew, the moment. You place your hand over the mark. The stone is cool, but the air is warm. Maybe that's the point, not to preserve the flavor, but the feeling that once, here, something was shared. Quietly. Gratefully. And though the taste is lost to time, the memory remains. The cellar archive feels like a place time forgot. Damp stone walls, flickering oil lanterns, dust that tastes of parchment and old brass. Most monks visit it only when they must. But tonight, you're here by invitation, drawn by a story whispered through the brewhouse for years, the monk who tried to hear beer. Brother Octavian, long gone now. His name half remembered, his habits mostly legend. But somewhere in the farthest corner of the cellar, past rows of ink-black bottles and crumbling ledgers, sits his masterpiece, a strange wooden instrument, equal. Parts organ, wind chime and brewing kettle. Strings run from cask to cask. Tiny copper pipes curl like vines along its frame. Glass vessels dangle from cords, some filled with liquid, others with nothing but dust and silence. You step closer. Beside it, a thick notebook, its cover stained with hops and fingerprints, its pages filled with notations and lines of musical script, jagged, uneven, desperate. Brother Marius, the cellar keeper, appears behind you. Octavian believed every beer had a sound, he says quietly. Not just metaphor, literal music. He claimed the chemical reactions, the air in the room, even the yeast vibrations formed frequencies. You flip through the pages, each beer listed not by flavor but by chord. Batch 15, minor third descending, sharp on the inhale, resolves into something almost sacred. Batch 26, dissonant, too much heat in the mash, or unresolved grief. Octavian didn't just want to capture the taste, he wanted to compose it. He tuned barrels like drums, Marius says, gesturing to small brass knobs bolted into the sides. Said he could hear when the fermentation was off. He built this, he motions to the instrument, to play the beers back. You ask what happened to him. Marius's eyes soften. He stopped sleeping, started muttering about notes, hidden in bitterness, and harmonies only yeast understood. One morning he packed up a cask and walked into the hills. You ask if he ever returned. Marius shakes his head. But the beer did. You raise your eyebrows. 3 weeks later, a small barrel arrived by cart. No label. Inside was the most hauntingly strange brew we'd ever tasted. Sweet, but sad. Like a lullaby no one finished. No one ever replicated it. The flavor was lost. But the chord? Octavian had written it on the inside of the cask lid, brewed in D minor, for the silence between sips. You stand in the cellar, the faint hum of pipes and bottles around you. You swear for just a moment you hear a low tone vibrating in your ribs. Not sound, not exactly. Something deeper, somewhere between flavor and music. The children weren't supposed to be in the brewhouse, at least not officially, but somehow they always found their way in, slipping past the garden walls, darting between the barrels, hiding beneath tables while the monks pretended not to notice. They weren't orphans exactly. Most were children from nearby villages, dropped off for a day or a season when parents needed help or healing or time, and the brewhouse, it became their playground. You walk through it now, late afternoon light casting golden rectangles across the floor. A tiny handprint smudges one of the lower casks. A marble rests in the crack between two stones. A chalk drawing of a smiling mug peeks from beneath the kettle's base. Brother Emile meets you by the cooling trough. He's laughing already. They used to call the fermentation chamber the dragon's belly, he says. Said it hissed and growled. They'd dare each other to sneak in and touch the barrels. You smile. But you know what's strange, he adds. They may have saved our yeast. He gestures toward a worn wooden shelf tucked in the corner, lined with stoppered flasks, each labeled with a year and a symbol. About 20 years ago, our primary yeast strain started collapsing. The brews lost their life. We tried everything. Nothing worked. He pauses. Until we found their jar. You blink. The children? He nods. They'd made a game out of collecting foam scraps, little bits from spills, crust from old mugs, scum from the edge of the cooling pots. They called it brew jelly, kept it in a jar, buried it in the herb garden with a stick for a flag. He chuckles. We dug it up by accident, and inside? The yeast was thriving, alive, unique, uncontaminated, not quite like the old strain, but close, livelier, wilder, a bit unpredictable. We call it rhesus now, Emile says, Latin for laughter. Historians won't find it in formal records. The children's games were never written down, but their fingerprints remain literally on the barrels, the stairs, the yeast strain that brought the brews back to life. Every batch we make with rhesus has something extra, Emile says softly. Like it remembers being born in mischief. You hear a giggle echo from the courtyard outside, a child's voice, faint, fleeting. You smile, because some brews don't come from careful hands or ancient recipes. Some come from joy, from chaos, from dragon lair dares and chalk dust and sticky fingers, and maybe, just maybe, That's what kept the spirit of the brew house alive. They still call it the sour year. Even now, decades later, monks speak of it in hushed tones near the hearth, like a wound that scabbed but never quite healed. It was the year nothing worked, not the water, not the yeast, not even the prayers. You sit close to the fire, its warmth comforting against the night's chill, as Brother Henrik leans in and begins the story. It started with a spoiled barrel, he says. We thought it was the wood, or the rain. Then the next batch went sour too, then the next, then the next. Every brew, no matter the ingredients, no matter the method, turned sharp, metallic, wrong. Some said it was punishment, others blamed the yeast or the weather or whispers of mold in the stone walls, but the result was the same. Every single barrel failed. You ask what they did. We stopped, he says simply. First time in living memory. The kettles sat cold for 3 months. The monastery felt hollow. No scent of mash in the morning, no steam curling up through the courtyard grates, no laughter over tastings, just silence, and the quiet ache of something sacred gone missing. Some monks turned to the vineyards, others to prayer. One quietly left. Then, one morning, deep in winter, a barrel rolled loose during a storm. The wind had slipped in through a cracked cellar door. A stack had shifted, and at the bottom sat a single unmarked cask. No one remembered brewing it. No entry in the log. No initials, nothing. Out of curiosity or maybe desperation, they tapped it. It hissed open. They poured a cup and stared. The liquid was golden, clouded like morning fog. It smelled like lemon and warm hay. It should have been sour, but it wasn't. It was sharp, yes, bright, alive, tart in a way that made the tongue sit up and listen. Someone called it ruined, Henrik says. Another said it tasted like laughter after weeping. They drank the whole barrel that night, slowly, reverently. It wasn't what they'd tried to make, it was something better, something new. Historians call it the origin of the abbey's sour ale tradition. But here, by the fire, the monks call it a gift, or maybe a reminder, that sometimes failure isn't the end of a craft, it's the beginning of another. Henrik leans back, hands outstretched toward the flames. Every year since, he says, we brew one unplanned batch, we don't track it. Don't name it, don't try to control it, we just let it happen. You nod slowly, because now you understand, even the sourest seasons might leave behind a sweetness, if you're willing to taste it. Brother Laurent believed in harmony, not just within the cloister or in chant or silence, but in taste. He was a quiet man, a patient man, and perhaps the only monk who ever tried to pair every single brew with a psalm. He said it wasn't about theology. It's resonance, he once murmured over a mug. The right words make the brew deepen. No one quite understood him, but he kept at it, for years. You find his notes, scribbled in the margins of brewing logs, in songbooks even, inside the covers of psalters. Short lines written in his small looping hand. Batch 47, Psalm 4. You have put more joy in my heart, pairs well with barley smoke and dusk. Batch 103, Psalm 13. How long, O Lord? Too bitter, let it rest 3 more days. Some monks chuckled at the idea. Others began to request certain pairings when they needed comfort or clarity, until one day he paired too well. It was a honey amber brew, made during a bright spring with lavender and the last of the winter oats. Soft on the tongue, crisp at the end. Laurent paired it with Psalm 34. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Everyone laughed at the obviousness until they tasted it and wept. Not because it was sad, not because it was overwhelming, but because it felt like truth. The brew was light, but it carried weight. Each sip felt like a sunrise inside your ribs, as though the psalm had melted into the liquid, and the liquid had whispered something only your soul could hear. People stopped talking for hours. The abbot asked Laurent how he had done it. He simply said, I didn't. It chose me. After that, the monks asked for fewer pairings, not out of doubt, out of respect. Historians won't find these moments in records. No scripture references a beer that made grown men weep. But if you flip through Brother Laurent's psalm book, you'll see the notations still there. Next to some, a small barley stalk. Next to Psalm 34, a gold ring drawn in ink. Underneath, faintly written, "This one never needed me." You close the book and wonder, what happens when a drink doesn't just pair with a psalm, but becomes one?